There comes a moment in your walk with God when He begins developing a different kind of strength inside you, one that doesn't rely on noise, reactions, or outward force. It's a strength that shows up as calm, a strength clothed in self-control, a strength that whispers instead of shouts, and in that quiet whisper, God begins to tell you, train your spirit to rise above what once drained you. Not because you suddenly stopped feeling, not because life became easier, and not because the old wounds disappeared overnight, but because you finally started discovering who you are, who God is, and what no longer deserves access to the deepest parts of your peace. There was a version of you that responded to everything, a version that felt attacked by every careless comment, shaken by every change in someone's tone, bothered by every misunderstanding, wounded by every delay. A version that felt the need to explain, defend, justify, or earn acceptance. A version that believed you had to prove your worth so people wouldn't misjudge you, but the season you are stepping into requires a different version of you. A more centered version, a wiser version, a spiritually trained version, one who knows when to speak and when to stay silent, when to engage and when to withdraw, when to fight and when to rest your case in God's hands. Being unbothered is not ignorance, it is mastery. It is choosing not to let small distractions consume a destiny crafted by God Himself. It's not pretending life doesn't hurt. It's refusing to let every hurt have the power to dictate your identity. God is shaping you into someone who can stand steady while everything around you tries to pull you out of character. Someone who can remain grounded even when emotions rise. Someone who knows that peace is not something you stumble into. It is something you protect with intention. Emotional strength begins with identity, and identity stabilizes the emotions that once controlled you. Many of us grew up believing our emotional reactions were permanent personality traits. We learned to say, "That's just the way I am." But God never intended for your emotions to run your destiny. He intended them to signal, not steer, to inform, not dominate, to reveal, not rule. When you don't know who you are in God, emotions feel like truth. If you feel rejected, you assume you are rejected. If you feel unseen, you believe you are invisible. If you feel misunderstood, you think you are the problem. But when identity becomes rooted in truth, emotions lose their authority to rewrite your worth. Your feelings may say, "I am alone," but God says, "I am with you." Your feelings may say, "I'm not enough," but God says, "You are wonderfully made." Your feelings may say, "I'm losing," but God says, "I am working all things for your good." When your identity is anchored, your emotions can shake you, but they can't sink you. The next layer of emotional strength is learning the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is immediate, impulsive, driven by insecurity and unhealed wounds. Responding is intentional, thoughtful, rooted in clarity. Reacting is what the old you did because you felt unsafe. Responding is what the strengthened you will do because now you know you're covered. You no longer need to attend every argument you're invited to. You no longer need to fix every false impression someone has of you. You no longer need to clarify every misunderstanding. Not every voice deserves your energy. Not every situation deserves your presence. Not every comment deserves space in your spirit. This is emotional discipline. Emotional discipline is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming grounded. It's about creating boundaries around your spirit so you don't keep bleeding energy into places that feed neither your purpose nor your peace. Some wounds speak loudly. Old rejection creates sensitivity. Old betrayal creates suspicion. Old abandonment creates fear. When these wounds go unhealed, they convince your emotions to be louder than God's truth. But healing quiets the emotional noise that used to dictate your decisions. Healing gives you clarity. Healing gives you dignity. Healing gives you authority over the triggers that once ran your life. Another part of emotional discipline is refusing to take everything personally. Someone's tone may reflect their own battles, not your worth. Someone's distance may reflect their own insecurity, not your value. Someone's jealousy may reflect their own fear, not your failure. You are no longer available to internalize everything happening around you. Your identity gives you permission to say, "This is about them, not me." And when you stop personalizing everything, you stop giving unnecessary power to the actions of people who were never assigned to your peace. God is also teaching you how to pause. The pause is holy. The pause is powerful. The pause is where the Holy Spirit gets a chance to interrupt old patterns before they drag you into unnecessary battles. Pausing before reacting is how you reclaim authority over your emotions. Pause long enough to breathe. Pause long enough to pray. Pause long enough to recognize the difference between a trigger and truth. And as you pause, you realize not every feeling requires action. Some feelings just need acknowledgement, release, and redirection. Emotional discipline also looks like silence, not silence as avoidance, but silence as strategy. Silence is the space where God teaches you self-control. Silence lets your spirit stabilize before your mouth speaks. Silence is where wisdom grows. When God strengthens you emotionally, He strengthens your boundaries. He teaches you that your peace is a divine assignment, not an optional luxury. He teaches you that you can care deeply without carrying everything. He teaches you that empathy does not require self-abandonment. He teaches you that you can love people without sacrificing your sanity. Emotional discipline is stewardship, stewarding your peace, your energy, your attention, your calling. And as you learn to guard your peace, you begin recognizing that your emotional world determines your spiritual effectiveness. When your emotions are steady, your mind becomes clear. When your mind is clear, your spirit becomes sensitive. When your spirit is sensitive, your purpose becomes unstoppable, because the version of you that God is raising is not fragile. You are being shaped into someone who cannot be shaken by the same things that once broke you. You are rising, you are strengthening, you are maturing, you are becoming unbothered, not numb but anchored. There's a stronger, wiser, more grounded version of you waking up, and what God is about to reveal next will make your old reactions look small. Mastering emotional discipline begins with recognizing that your emotions were never meant to be villains, only messengers. They speak, but they should not govern. They alert you, but they should not command. And when God starts maturing your inner world, He doesn't silence your emotions. He teaches you how to reinterpret them. For years, you may have moved through life thinking that every emotional spike required a reaction, that every hurt required an explanation, that every uncomfortable moment demanded either defense or withdrawal. But God is training you to break the pattern of reacting as if every situation is a threat. He is teaching you to feel deeply without being led blindly. Your emotions are real, but they are not your identity. They are present, but they are not permanent. They are loud, but they do not hold ultimate authority. God does. Many emotional spirals begin with unresolved wounds. Rejection from childhood can make a simple disagreement feel like abandonment. A betrayal from years ago can make a harmless comment seem dangerous. A season of loneliness can make someone's silence feel like a personal attack. Without healing, emotions magnify shadows until they look like storms. But God, in His grace, begins tending to the wounds behind the reactions. He starts exposing the root beneath the reflex. You think you're angry, but He shows you the grief underneath. You think you're upset, but He reveals the insecurity hiding beneath the surface. You think you're being disrespected, but He shows you how old pain is still whispering. This is how emotional discipline begins, by letting truth speak louder than triggers. Once your identity becomes grounded in God, circumstances lose the ability to redefine you. And when you are no longer controlled by the need to be seen, validated, or defended, emotional discipline becomes natural. Your emotions stop speaking to your insecurities and start flowing through your healed identity. One of the greatest shifts in emotional discipline is understanding that peace is not something you wait for. It is something you cultivate. Peace requires intention. Peace requires boundaries. Peace requires knowing what deserves your energy and what does not. You are discovering that peace is power. Peace clarifies your decisions. Peace strengthens your discernment. Peace sharpens your intuition. Peace protects your purpose. The world may call it indifference, but heaven calls it alignment. There are moments when God will lead you into silence, not to punish you, but to upgrade your reactions. Silence teaches you discipline. Silence teaches you control. Silence teaches you to hear God before you hear your emotions. Silence reveals where you need healing and where you need restraint. Silence is not a lack of strength. It is the womb where strength grows. When God trains you in inner calm, He is preparing you to carry assignments that chaos cannot handle. Destiny requires a stable vessel. If you are easily shaken by small storms, the weight of your calling will feel unbearable. But when you learn to manage your internal world, your external world loses its power to intimidate you. Some situations in your life have not been attacks, they have been training. You have been placed in places where your reactions were tested, not because God wanted you frustrated, but because He wanted you fortified. You learned how to remain steady when someone misunderstood you. You learned how to keep your dignity when someone pushed your buttons. You learned how to stay calm when someone tried to pull you into old patterns. Every moment that stretched your emotions was actually strengthening your spirit. Another layer of emotional discipline is recognizing emotional invitations and declining them. You are no longer required to respond to everything that demands your attention. Not every argument deserves your voice. Not every disagreement needs a conclusion. Not every insult deserves acknowledgement. Some things are beneath the version of you God is building. You don't need to react to prove your character. You don't need to respond to validate your worth. You don't need to explain yourself to be understood. Your peace is worth more than winning a moment, and the moment you stop explaining your heart to people committed to misunderstanding you, you step into a new level of freedom. Over-explaining was born from fear, fear of being misinterpreted, fear of being judged unfairly, fear of being dismissed, but emotional discipline gives you the confidence to stand firm without lengthy justification. Your boundaries no longer come with essays. Your no longer requires a paragraph. Your decisions no longer need a defense. Your life speaks for you. Your actions speak for you. Your growth speaks for you. There is also a profound maturity in learning how to let others feel what they feel without taking it personally. Their opinions do not define you. Their discomfort does not dictate you. Their reactions do not control you. You are not responsible for fixing someone else's emotional world. You can love people deeply without absorbing their battles. Empathy does not equal emotional ownership. Compassion does not equal self-sacrifice. You can show care without losing yourself. Another part of emotional discipline is recognizing when you have outgrown emotional environments. You can no longer thrive in places where chaos is normal. Disrespect is disguised as humor, or tension is called love. Some environments drain you because they were built for a version of you that no longer exists. When God elevates your identity, He also elevates your emotional standards. You stop settling for atmospheres that suffocate your peace. You stop tolerating relationships that constantly test your patience. You stop participating in cycles that strip you of clarity. Growth will cost you access to certain spaces, but that cost is an investment into your emotional health. As you grow, God will also teach you the beauty of spiritual perspective. You begin to see that not every inconvenience is an attack, some are lessons. Not every delay is denial, some are preparation. Not every closed door is rejection, some are protection. Spiritual perspective transforms emotional chaos into clarity. When you understand that God is involved in every detail, you stop reacting to life as if you are abandoned. Instead, you respond with a calm confidence that says, God is here even in this. This is emotional discipline, the ability to feel without falling apart, the ability to think without spiraling, the ability to react without losing yourself. And as you step into this new level of emotional maturity, you'll notice something. You're not becoming harder, you're becoming wiser. You're not becoming cold, you're becoming grounded. You're not becoming distant, you're becoming disciplined. This is transformation, not detachment. Emotional discipline is the quiet strength that prepares you for everything God is leading you toward. You're stepping into a version of yourself that old chaos cannot reach, and what God shapes in you next will shift everything you touch. There is a powerful shift that happens when God starts teaching you how to break the habits that once kept you emotionally exhausted. These habits were never just emotional patterns, they were survival patterns, patterns you built during seasons when you didn't feel safe, heard, valued, or protected. But now God is calling you into a different life. A fuller one, a healed one, a grounded one, one where your reactions no longer lead your future and your peace is no longer placed in the hands of uncertainty. One of the first habits God begins to address is the habit of overreacting. Overreacting doesn't mean you're dramatic. It means you've been through too much without enough healing. It means the little things feel bigger because your heart has learned to stay on guard. Somewhere in your past, someone taught you, intentionally or unintentionally, that you had to protect yourself because no one else would, and so your emotions became alarms, always scanning, always alert, always prepared to defend. But now God is showing you that not every situation is a threat, not every word is an attack, not every silence is rejection, not every delay is danger. He is teaching your spirit that it can finally unclench its fists, loosen its shoulders, and breathe again. The power of breaking overreaction begins with learning the pause. The pause is a holy interruption. It is the space where you prevent the old version of yourself from speaking for the healed version you are becoming. The pause gives you room to ask yourself, am I reacting to this moment, or am I reacting to my history? Is this a real threat or a familiar trigger? Is this about what's happening or about something unresolved inside me? And in that pause, God gives you clarity. The thing that felt like an emergency becomes manageable. The situation that felt personal becomes neutral. The fear that felt overwhelming becomes a whisper you no longer obey. The pause doesn't erase emotion. It gives your spirit the authority to choose how to express it. God also begins dismantling the habit of over-explaining. Over-explaining is born from the fear that people will misunderstand your intentions. It comes from spending years trying to prove your heart to people who weren't even willing to see it. When rejection shaped your early experiences, you learned to over-communicate in hopes of protecting yourself from being misjudged again. But emotional discipline teaches you that your worth does not require a speech. Your boundaries do not require an essay. Your decisions do not require a dissertation. Your healing does not require a debate. Not every truth is meant to be defended. Some truths are meant to be lived. God is freeing you from the burden of convincing people. If someone is determined to misread you, more words will not change their lens. Some people misunderstand you because clarity threatens their comfort. Some people misjudge you because seeing your growth disrupts their familiarity. Their misinterpretation is not your responsibility to correct. There's a quiet confidence that rises when you stop explaining yourself. You begin to talk less and observe more. You start walking in purpose without broadcasting your reasoning. You make decisions guided by God, not by the need to be understood. And suddenly, peace replaces the anxiety that used to tighten your chest whenever you felt misread. Then God addresses the cage of overthinking. Overthinking is not a random habit. It is a protective reflex built by someone who had to prepare for disappointment. It is the mind's attempt to create safety by imagining every possible outcome. But overthinking doesn't protect you. It exhausts you. It makes your mind replay what God already resolved. It makes you fear what hasn't happened. It makes you assume the worst because the past trained you to expect loss. But overthinking is not a thinking problem, it is a trust problem. When trust grows, overthinking loses its authority. God begins to show you that your mind does not need to be the manager of every detail. Your mind is not responsible for predicting outcomes. Your mind is not responsible for controlling the future. Your mind is not responsible for solving what only God can handle. You learn to ask yourself, is this thought coming from fear or from faith? If it is fear, you gently release it. If it is faith, you let it guide you. Breaking the habit of overthinking means choosing not to torment yourself with what ifs. It means refusing to replay conversations that cannot be changed. It means redirecting your imagination away from catastrophe and toward God's promises. Fear imagines the worst. Faith imagines alignment. God doesn't ask you to stop thinking. He asks you to stop letting your thoughts lead your spirit. Your mind must become a servant, not a master. As these habits begin to break, your whole inner world shifts. You stop rushing to defend yourself. You stop spiraling into scenarios that never existed. You stop reacting to every uncomfortable moment. You stop giving emotional power to things that don't carry eternal value. You begin to recognize your triggers without becoming them. You feel emotions without being consumed by them. You encounter frustrations without losing your grounding. You learn that emotional maturity is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of wisdom. Even when emotions rise, you remain centered. You breathe deeper, you speak slower, you move intentionally. This is the version of you God has been forming. Someone who lives with clarity, not chaos, with confidence, not panic, with grounded truth, not emotional storms. It doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't crumble. It doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means you become equipped. It doesn't mean you never get triggered. It means triggers no longer drive. Emotional discipline is the bridge between who you were and who God is calling you to become. It's the training that prepares you for influence, for deeper purpose, for bigger responsibility. Because influence without emotional stability becomes chaos. But influence with emotional discipline becomes impact. God is inviting you into this transformation not to change your personality, but to strengthen your capacity, not to silence your heart, but to heal it, not to make you indifferent, but to make you intentional. You are stepping into a version of yourself that responds with wisdom instead of wounds, clarity instead of confusion, discernment instead of desperation. The strengthened you is rising, and this transformation is only the beginning. You're breaking patterns that once controlled you, and what God reveals as you keep growing will reshape the way you walk through every battle ahead. Becoming unshakable is not something that happens overnight. It is a process, one that God builds slowly, intentionally, and deeply. It begins the moment you stop depending on circumstances to confirm your peace and start depending on God to anchor it. The truth is, life will always present moments that demand a reaction. People will disappoint you. Situations will shift unexpectedly. Plans will fall through. What you expected will not always match what unfolds. But when God becomes your anchor, your soul stops being tossed by every wave that comes your way. Trust is the foundation of becoming unshakable, and trust is not a feeling. It is a choice. Trust is deciding that even when your emotions feel overwhelmed, your spirit will stand firm. Trust is saying, I don't have to see the whole picture to know that God is already ahead of me. Trust is choosing faith even when fear is loud. Trust is believing that every unpredictable moment still falls under God's control. The reason the old version of you reacted so quickly, panicked so easily, or spiraled so deeply is because your foundation wasn't secure yet. You were relying on your own strength. You were leaning on people's approval. You were placing your confidence in outcomes that were unstable. When the foundation is fragile, every little thing feels like a threat. But when your foundation becomes God, nothing can pull you out of alignment. Becoming unshakable means letting God stabilize your inner world. It means allowing Him to create strength in you that circumstances cannot touch. It means letting Him do the slow, quiet work of rewiring your perspective. Suddenly, the same storms that once scared you start teaching you instead. The same delays that once frustrated you start strengthening you. The same challenges that once overwhelmed you start maturing you. Becoming unshakable requires a shift in how you interpret your battles. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening?" you begin asking, "What is God developing in me through this?" Instead of seeing hardship as punishment, you begin seeing it as preparation. Instead of viewing obstacles as barriers, you begin viewing them as training, and this shift changes everything. Because when your perspective changes, your emotional responses change with it. You no longer break under pressure, you learn under pressure. You no longer panic in uncertainty, you grow in uncertainty. You no longer fall apart in confusion. You stand firm until clarity comes. God builds unshakable people in seasons of stretching. He strengthens them in silence. He matures them in stillness. He develops them in hidden places. Some of the strongest parts of you are being developed in moments no one else sees. And that is exactly why some seasons felt so heavy. You weren't being destroyed, you were being developed. Becoming unshakable means leaning into God instead of leaning into fear. Fear exaggerates, fear distorts, fear magnifies problems until they seem bigger than God. But faith does the opposite. Faith magnifies God until your problems shrink back into their proper size. Fear tells you that the storm will swallow you. Faith tells you that God is with you in the storm. Fear tells you that you're losing control. Faith says you never needed control. God has it. Whenever fear rises, you have a choice. Follow fear or follow faith. And each time you choose faith, even with trembling hands, you grow stronger. Becoming unshakable also means releasing the need to control every detail. Control is one of the greatest enemies of peace. You cannot walk in emotional stability if you're constantly trying to micromanage life. You cannot experience true peace if your peace depends on predictable outcomes. Control is rooted in fear. It is the belief that if you don't handle everything yourself, everything will collapse. But God is teaching you a new way. A surrendered way, a trusting way, a way that says, "I don't need to manage this because God already has a plan." A way that says, "I don't need to understand it all to walk through it." A way that says, "I let go of control so I can hold on to peace." Becoming unshakable means building spiritual reflexes, reflexes that turn your attention toward God before anxiety takes over, reflexes that lead you to pray instead of panic, reflexes that pull you into worship instead of worry, reflexes that remind you of God's past faithfulness when your mind starts assuming the worst. Your reflexes used to be emotional, reacting, spiraling, overthinking, but God is replacing them with spiritual reflexes: peace, clarity, grounding, trust. And as those reflexes strengthen, you begin to handle life differently. When something goes wrong, you pause instead of exploding. When someone mistreats you, you breathe instead of breaking. When circumstances shift suddenly, you stand instead of sinking. You become steady, surprising steady, quietly steady, unexplainably steady. Another essential part of being unshakable is remembering what God has already brought you through. Your memory is a spiritual weapon. Your testimony is not just a story, it's evidence, evidence that God shows up, evidence that He delivers, evidence that He sustains, evidence that He finishes what He starts. Whenever fear tries to rise, remind yourself, "I've been here before and God made a way. I've felt this before and God carried me. I've faced this before and God strengthened me. I've worried before and God answered." Every break through you've experienced becomes a pillar inside your spirit, a pillar that steadies you when life becomes unstable, a pillar that protects you from emotional collapse, a pillar that reminds you God has a perfect track record and He will not fail you now. Becoming unshakable means refusing to let circumstances define your identity. People may shift, but your identity remains. Circumstances may challenge you, but they cannot name you. Loss may hurt you, but it cannot reduce you. Storms may shake your environment, but they cannot shake who you are in God. You are chosen. You are held. You are strengthened. You are guided. You are protected. You are equipped. And once you know who you truly are, life loses the ability to shake you the way it used to. Being unshakable doesn't mean you don't feel things. It means you don't fall apart when you feel them. It doesn't mean you never cry. It means you cry, wipe your face, breathe deep, and move forward with grace. It doesn't mean you never worry. It means you don't let worry write your story. Becoming unshakable is becoming anchored, grounded, rooted, confident in God more than circumstances, more than emotions, more than predictions, more than fear. This is the strength God is building in you, quiet, deep, and unstoppable. There's a divine stability rising inside you, and what God strengthens next will give you a peace that no storm can shake. When God begins teaching you how to protect your peace, it's not because He wants you isolated, emotionless, or detached from the world. It's because He knows the assignments over your life require a level of focus that emotional chaos can no longer be allowed to disturb. Peace is not something you stumble into. It is something you choose, cultivate, and guard with intention. It is a spiritual discipline, a sacred boundary, and a divine responsibility. Many people think peace means a life without conflict. But real peace is not the absence of trouble. It is the ability to remain steady while trouble tries to find you. Peace is clarity when confusion surrounds you. Peace is calm in the middle of uncertainty. Peace is the quiet confidence that God is working, even when nothing seems to be moving. Protecting your peace begins with understanding what drains it. You lose peace every time you say yes to something your spirit whispered no to. You lose peace when you engage in conversations that drag you backward instead of pushing you forward. You lose peace when you try to fix what was never your assignment to mend. You lose peace when you give emotional energy to situations that don't honor your growth or your boundaries. Some of the heaviness you've been carrying wasn't spiritual attack, it was emotional clutter. Clutter from people who only call when they need something. Clutter from unresolved tension you never had the courage to close. Clutter from responsibilities you accepted out of guilt instead of God's guidance. Clutter from cycles that were familiar but never fruitful. God is teaching you that peace is not passive, it is power. Peace is the strength to walk away without bitterness. Peace is the discipline to stay silent when your old self would have exploded. Peace is the wisdom to identify who deserves access to your energy and who doesn't. Peace is the ability to remain unmoved by things that once sent your spirit into chaos. This is the season where God is training you to choose peace over pettiness, purpose over reaction, clarity over confusion. You are learning that not everything deserves your engagement, not every comment deserves your attention, not every situation deserves your presence. You are learning the sacred art of selective investment. Protecting your peace means you no longer allow people to dump their emotional chaos into your spirit. You can be supportive without becoming someone else's emotional landfill. You can care deeply without becoming drained. You can listen without carrying. You can love without self-abandonment. Some people don't want help. They want attention. Some don't seek solutions. They seek reaction. Some don't desire clarity. They desire control. Discern the difference. God is strengthening your ability to identify the difference between a genuine connection and an emotional burden disguised as loyalty. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You do not need to shrink your peace just to make someone else comfortable in their disorder. Protecting your peace means releasing the false belief that you owe everyone access to your emotions. Access is not entitlement, it is earned. You are no longer available to people who bring confusion, chaos, or instability to your environment. You can still wish them well, pray for them, and bless them, but from a distance that protects your spirit. As God grows you emotionally, He will also require you to let go of the obsession with closure. Closure is not always a conversation. Closure is peace. Closure is acceptance. Closure is recognizing that God saw what you didn't, knew what you couldn't, and removed what you weren't strong enough to release yourself. Closure is understanding that some explanations would only wound you deeper. Closure is knowing that God doesn't need to defend why He protected you. Protecting your peace also means understanding that silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Silence is wisdom. Silence is the ability to remain in control of your emotions instead of volunteering your peace for an argument you didn't need to enter. Silence is strength disguised as calm. There will be moments where God leads you to hold your tongue not because you don't have something to say, but because what you could say would cost you more than the moment is worth. Silence says, I choose my spirit over this argument. Silence says, I refuse to hand over my peace for temporary satisfaction. Silence says, my response is too valuable to spend on this. God will also teach you to recognize the environments that sabotage your peace. Not every place can hold the version of you God is forming. Some rooms are too small for your calling. Some atmospheres are too chaotic for your growth. Some relationships are too draining for the next level of your purpose. Protecting your peace means being aware of where you flourish and where you diminish. You are not obligated to stay where your peace starves. You are not required to show up where your spirit is undervalued. You no longer need to pretend to be okay in spaces that consistently silence your voice, drain your energy, or minimize your worth. Protecting your peace means learning the sacred power of saying no. No to emotional manipulation. No to draining commitments. No to inconsistent communication. No to energy vampires. No to obligations that don't align with your spirit. No to environments that pull you backward instead of forward. No to patterns that keep you repeating cycles. Your no is not rejection. It is protection. It is clarity. It is self-respect. Saying no is how you guard the peace God gave you. Another part of protecting your peace is learning to speak to your own soul. Sometimes you must quiet your inner chaos before it spills into your life. Sometimes you must remind yourself, I don't have to respond to this. I'm allowed to choose peace. I can walk away without guilt. I can let go without bitterness. I don't need to explain myself. I don't need their approval to be at peace. There is power in becoming the voice that calms your own spirit. And as God strengthens this discipline in you, something beautiful happens. You start to feel lighter. You start to move through life with a new kind of ease. Your heart feels less cluttered. Your mind feels clearer. Your emotions feel more stable. Peace begins shaping your decisions rather than your reactions. You begin living from a place of alignment instead of survival. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It is sacred. It is God teaching you how to treat your spirit with honor. It is God revealing that anything which constantly disrupts your peace is not aligned with your destiny. It is God saying, I want you to carry joy without interruption and clarity without collapse. This peace will become the foundation of everything God builds in you next. Your spirit is being trained to guard what once slipped through your fingers, and the peace God is placing in you now will shape the strength you walk with next. Breaking the habits that once held you back is one of the most sacred journeys God leads you through. It's not easy work, it's not glamorous work, and it's not quick work, but it is transformative work, work that shifts the way you think, the way you respond, the way you show up, and the way you move through life. These habits were never merely bad behaviors. They were emotional reflexes shaped in seasons where you survived through instinct rather than identity. But now God is calling you out of survival and into stability. One of the most draining habits of the old you was overreacting. Perhaps you never meant to be reactive. Perhaps you never wanted everything to feel so personal. But when you've lived through moments where you weren't protected, weren't believed, or weren't valued, your spirit learns to overdefend itself. Even small things feel big when your heart still carries old wounds. Overreacting is not born from anger, it is born from fear. Fear of being hurt again, fear of being blindsided, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being overlooked. But God is gently removing that fear and replacing it with clarity. He is teaching you that you do not have to fight every perceived danger, because not everything is a threat. Some things are simply moments, not messages. Some situations are temporary, not defining. The key to breaking overreaction lies in the pause, the holy pause that interrupts the old pattern before it takes over. The pause is spiritual surgery. It is the moment your spirit says, "Wait, breathe, examine what's happening before you respond." In the pause, God reveals whether your reaction is from this moment or from an old memory. And once you know the difference, your emotions lose the power to control your decisions. Then there's the habit of over-explaining. Over-explaining is one of the most common emotional traps. You feel responsible for managing how others see you. You fear being misunderstood because you've lived through seasons where you weren't given the benefit of the doubt. So you try to clarify everything, but God is teaching you that your worth does not depend on how many explanations you give. The truth does not gain strength through repetition. Your boundaries do not require persuasion. Your growth does not need proof. When a person is determined to misinterpret you, your explanations will not shift their mindset. They heard you the first time. They simply weren't willing to understand. Over-explaining fades when you realize that you don't owe emotional access to everyone. You don't owe your inner reasoning to every voice in the room. You don't owe a detailed defense for decisions God placed in your spirit. When you stop explaining yourself to people who don't value clarity, you start protecting your peace. The next habit God begins to dismantle is overthinking. Overthinking is not a sign of overintelligence. It's a sign of emotional overload. It's the mind's attempt to create certainty where none exists. Overthinking comes from seasons where you had to be your own protector, planner, and predictor. When you've lived in environments that lacked stability, your mind becomes addicted to scanning for potential danger. But you are not living in those environments anymore. God is showing you that not every scenario requires dissecting. Not every silence needs interpretation. Not every delay needs an explanation. Overthinking is an exhausting conversation with fears that are no longer relevant. And when you let trust take the place of obsessive analysis, your mind finally finds rest. Breaking overthinking requires training your thoughts to follow truth instead of fear. It means telling yourself, "I don't need to know everything to move forward." It means giving yourself permission to stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. It means handing outcomes to God instead of trying to manipulate them with mental exhaustion. These three habits, overreacting, over-explaining, and overthinking, are all born from the same root, fear. Fear that you will not be enough. Fear that something bad will happen. Fear that you will be rejected. Fear that people will not see your heart. But God is cutting these roots not to shame you, but to free you. He is teaching you emotional discipline so your destiny can rise without being hindered by emotional patterns that no longer serve who you're becoming. Breaking these habits changes everything. You start responding from your healed identity, not your old insecurity. You begin moving with calm authority instead of frantic energy. You walk into rooms without scanning for hidden danger. You speak with intention rather than desperation. You step back from situations without guilt. You trust your decisions without seeking validation. You honor your peace the way God intended you to. As these habits break, you will notice a shift in how you carry yourself. You don't just think differently, you feel different. You feel lighter, you feel clearer, you feel grounded. You no longer feel hijacked by your own emotions. Instead of your feelings carrying you, you carry your feelings with wisdom. God is shaping you into someone who can experience emotion without losing direction. Someone who feels deeply but remains steady, someone who moves with grace even when life feels heavy. Emotional discipline is not about perfection, it's about regulation. It's about having authority over your reactions rather than letting your reactions have authority over you. Breaking old habits also elevates your relationships. You communicate with more intention, you listen with more patience, you forgive with more understanding, you stop assuming motives, you stop misreading silence. You stop taking everything personally. Your interactions feel healthier because your inner world is becoming healthier. And as your emotional patterns shift, your environment shifts too. People who thrived on your chaos lose their influence. Conversations that once triggered you no longer carry the same weight. Places that once drained you no longer have access to your peace. Even the way you talk to yourself becomes gentler, kinder, more compassionate. You begin giving yourself the grace you once gave everyone else. You begin understanding your own triggers without shaming yourself. You begin celebrating your growth even when it's quiet and unseen. You begin trusting your own voice again. This transformation does not make you cold. It makes you wise. It does not make you distant. It makes you discerning. It does not make you disconnected. It makes you grounded. You are becoming a version of yourself who is no longer threatened by emotional turbulence. You are rising into stability, into clarity, into identity, into emotional authority. God is shaping someone who cannot be easily shaken, manipulated, or provoked. Someone who can walk in storms without losing their center. Someone who can face challenges without collapsing internally. Someone who knows how to stay aligned even when life becomes unpredictable. You are being rebuilt from the inside out. And the inner strength forming inside you will influence everything you touch next. Breaking the habits that once held you back is one of the most sacred journeys God leads you through. It's not easy work. It's not glamorous work, and it's not quick work, but it is transformative work, work that shifts the way you think, the way you respond, the way you show up, and the way you move through life. These habits were never merely bad behaviors. They were emotional reflexes shaped in seasons where you survived through instinct rather than identity. But now God is calling you out of survival and into stability. One of the most draining habits of the old you was overreacting. Perhaps you never meant to be reactive. Perhaps you never wanted everything to feel so personal. But when you've lived through moments where you weren't protected, weren't believed, or weren't valued, your spirit learns to overdefend itself. Even small things feel big when your heart still carries old wounds. Overreacting is not born from anger, it is born from fear. Fear of being hurt again, fear of being blindsided, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being overlooked. But God is gently removing that fear and replacing it with clarity. He is teaching you that you do not have to fight every perceived danger because not everything is a threat. Some things are simply moments, not messages. Some situations are temporary, not defining. The key to breaking overreaction lies in the pause, the holy pause that interrupts the old pattern before it takes over. The pause is spiritual surgery. It is the moment your spirit says, "Wait, breathe, examine what's happening before you respond." In the pause, God reveals whether your reaction is from this moment or from an old memory. And once you know the difference, your emotions lose the power to control your decisions. Then there's the habit of over-explaining. Over-explaining is one of the most common emotional traps. You feel responsible for managing how others see you. You fear being misunderstood because you've lived through seasons where you weren't given the benefit of the doubt. So you try to clarify everything, but God is teaching you that your worth does not depend on how many explanations you give. The truth does not gain strength through repetition. Your boundaries do not require persuasion. Your growth does not need proof. When a person is determined to misinterpret you, your explanations will not shift their mindset. They heard you the first time. They simply weren't willing to understand. Over-explaining fades when you realize that you don't owe emotional access to everyone. You don't owe your inner reasoning to every voice in the room. You don't owe a detailed defense for decisions God placed in your spirit. When you stop explaining yourself to people who don't value clarity, you start protecting your peace. The next habit God begins to dismantle is overthinking. Overthinking is not a sign of overintelligence. It's a sign of emotional overload. It's the mind's attempt to create certainty where none exists. Overthinking comes from seasons where you had to be your own protector, planner, and predictor. When you've lived in environments that lacked stability, your mind becomes addicted to scanning for potential danger. But you are not living in those environments anymore. God is showing you that not every scenario requires dissecting. Not every silence needs interpretation. Not every delay needs an explanation. Overthinking is an exhausting conversation with fears that are no longer relevant. And when you let trust take the place of obsessive analysis, your mind finally finds rest. Breaking overthinking requires training your thoughts to follow truth instead of fear. It means telling yourself, I don't need to know everything to move forward. It means giving yourself permission to stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. It means handing outcomes to God instead of trying to manipulate them with mental exhaustion. These three habits, overreacting, over-explaining, and overthinking, are all born from the same root, fear. Fear that you will not be enough. Fear that something bad will happen. Fear that you will be rejected. Fear that people will not see your heart. But God is cutting these roots, not to shame you, but to free you. He is teaching you emotional discipline so your destiny can rise without being hindered by emotional patterns that no longer serve who you're becoming. Breaking these habits changes everything. You start responding from your healed identity, not your old insecurity. You begin moving with calm authority instead of frantic energy. You walk into rooms without scanning for hidden danger. You speak with intention rather than desperation. You step back from situations without guilt. You trust your decisions without seeking validation. You honor your peace the way God intended you to. As these habits break, you will notice a shift in how you carry yourself. You don't just think differently, you feel different. You feel lighter. You feel clearer. You feel grounded. You no longer feel hijacked by your own emotions. Instead of your feelings carrying you, you carry your feelings with wisdom. God is shaping you into someone who can experience emotion without losing direction. Someone who feels deeply but remains steady. Someone who moves with grace even when life feels heavy. Emotional discipline is not about perfection. It's about regulation. It's about having authority over your reactions rather than letting your reactions have authority over you. Breaking old habits also elevates your relationships. You communicate with more intention. You listen with more patience. You forgive with more understanding. You stop assuming motives. You stop misreading silence. You stop taking everything personally. Your interactions feel healthier because your inner world is becoming healthier. And as your emotional patterns shift, your environment shifts too. People who thrived on your chaos lose their influence. Conversations that once triggered you no longer carry the same weight. Places that once drained you no longer have access to your peace. Even the way you talk to yourself becomes gentler, kinder, more compassionate. You begin giving yourself the grace you once gave everyone else. You begin understanding your own triggers without shaming yourself. You begin celebrating your growth even when it's quiet and unseen. You begin trusting your own voice again. This transformation does not make you cold. It makes you wise. It does not make you distant. It makes you discerning. It does not make you disconnected. It makes you grounded. You are becoming a version of yourself who is no longer threatened by emotional turbulence. You are rising into stability, into clarity, into identity, into emotional authority. God is shaping someone who cannot be easily shaken, manipulated, or provoked. Someone who can walk in storms without losing their center. Someone who can face challenges without collapsing internally. Someone who knows how to stay aligned even when life becomes unpredictable. You are being rebuilt from the inside out. And the inner strength forming inside you will influence everything you touch next. There's a deeper strength waking up inside you, and the next shift God brings will turn your healed mindset into unstoppable momentum. There comes a moment on your journey where you no longer want to just survive life. You want to live it. You want to move through your days with intention instead of tension. You want to walk with confidence instead of caution. You want to breathe without feeling like something is always waiting to go wrong. And that shift happens when you learn how to trust God more than the circumstances pulling at your emotions. Becoming emotionally unbothered is impossible without learning to trust God at a deeper level. Trust is not blind optimism. Trust is not pretending everything is fine. Trust is not suppressing emotions or ignoring reality. Trust is releasing the belief that you must carry life alone and accepting the truth that God is carrying you even when you can't feel it. Trust means choosing God's character over your fears. Trust means believing He is working even when nothing seems to be moving. Trust means surrendering the desire to control the outcome because you finally understand that God sees more than you ever will. Trust means resting your heart in the hands of a Father who has never failed you. You learn to worry because life taught you that things fall apart without warning. You learn to over-prepare because you were never given space to feel safe. You learn to expect disappointment because disappointment became familiar, but trust invites you into a new understanding. What happened before is not what will happen next. God is not bound by the patterns of your past. To become unshakable, God teaches you how to stop leaning on what hurt you and start leaning on who heals you. He teaches you how to distinguish the voice of fear from the voice of faith. Fear exaggerates, inflates, and overwhelms. Faith steadies, calms, and realigns. Fear tells you that the worst is coming. Faith tells you that God is already there. Fear says you are alone. Faith says you are carried. Trust transforms how you react to uncertainty. Instead of spiraling, you pause. Instead of panicking, you pray. Instead of replaying the worst-case scenario, you remind yourself of God's history with you. When the heart remembers, the mind settles. When the mind settles, the emotions stop running wild. Trust is emotional stability. Becoming unshakable requires learning how to separate your emotions from the truth. You can feel worried and still trust. You can feel confused and still trust. You can feel tired and still trust. Trust is not the absence of emotion. It is the decision to follow God over those emotions. It is the spiritual maturity of saying, I feel this, but this feeling will not lead me. Becoming unshakable also means understanding that circumstances do not define God's presence. Silence does not mean absence. Delay does not mean denial. Confusion does not mean abandonment. Difficulty does not mean God has changed His mind. Sometimes God does His deepest work in moments where you feel the least in control. There are seasons where God will unfold answers slowly because He is building endurance within you. Seasons where He allows uncertainty because He is shaping your perspective. Seasons where He withholds what you want because He is strengthening your character. Seasons where He closes doors because He sees the danger behind them. When you trust His wisdom, you stop fighting His process. To be unshakable, God trains your spirit to remain steady even when your environment is shifting. This doesn't mean ignoring your emotions. It means not allowing them to dictate your path. It means learning how to sit with feelings without letting them sit on the throne of your decisions. It means telling your soul, we will not collapse here. God is too faithful for that. Trust also requires letting go of control. Control is a survival instinct. You try to hold tightly to situations because losing control once cost you deeply. But control is an exhausting burden to carry. Control demands answers that don't exist yet. Control forces you to anticipate pain that isn't even real. Control pretends to protect you while draining you. God whispers, "Let go," not because the situation isn't serious, but because you're not designed to carry it alone. When you release control, you create space for peace. Peace cannot flow into clenched hands. Peace needs room to breathe. Peace needs surrender. Peace needs trust. Becoming unshakable also means developing spiritual reflexes that keep you anchored. You learn how to speak truth to yourself before fear speaks lies. You learn to quiet your thoughts before they exaggerate what hasn't even unfolded. You learn how to redirect your focus from the problem to the promise keeper. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is talk to your own soul the way God talks to you. You are safe. You are held. You are guided. You are protected. You are stronger than you think. You will not be defeated here. Your emotions need truth or they will create their own. Becoming unshakable also means remembering what God has already carried you through. One victory in your past is enough evidence that He will carry you again. Every answered prayer becomes a brick in the foundation of your faith. Every closed door that later made sense becomes proof that God sees what you do not. Every season you survived becomes a reminder of your resilience. Your memory is a weapon. When fear tries to flood your mind, remember, you have been here before. You have felt overwhelmed before. You have walked in darkness before. You have faced uncertainty before, and every single time, God brought you out. You didn't survive by accident. You were held, you were guided, you were strengthened, you were covered. Trust grows when you stop letting your emotions tell you who God is and start letting who God is tell you how to feel. Becoming unshakable is not becoming emotionless. It is becoming anchored. It is becoming grounded. It is becoming steady. It is becoming spiritually mature. It is learning how to witness storms without absorbing them. It is learning how to face battles without losing your identity. It is learning how to walk through fire without smelling like smoke. This is the version of you God is forming, the you that reacts less and rests more, the you that panics less and prays more, the you that fears less and trusts more, the you that breaks less and breathes more. The you that sees God's hand even when life feels heavy. You are stepping into a strength that circumstances did not give you and cannot take from you. You are becoming unshakable, not because life got easier, but because your spirit got stronger. God is shaping someone who can carry purpose without being crushed by pressure. Someone who can lead with clarity without drowning in emotions. Someone who can stand tall even when life bends low. Someone who can move forward even when the path is blurry. Someone who refuses to be defined by fear, disappointment, or instability. This is not just healing, it is transformation. A transformation that will influence every decision you make, every relationship you cultivate, every battle you fight, and every season you enter. The strength rising inside you is not temporary. It is foundational, it is divine, it is intentional. You are not who you used to be, and you will never be shaken the way you once were. What God has awakened in you now is only the beginning. Your next chapter will reveal a strength you never knew you carried.